Hey guys, we're back here on the bonus round from GDC Next with Michael Pachter, Jason Rubin, and Seamus Blackley. We had an awesome discussion last week about Sony and the state of the console business. This week, let's turn to the other platform that's going to launch next week, which will be Xbox One from Microsoft. And what a year they've had. As you mentioned, Jason, when we saw you at E3, we were talking about the challenges Microsoft has faced overall this year. Seamus, let me start with you, since you obviously have a deep link to sort of the Xbox heritage. You've sort of watched this all from a distance, I think, this year. How do you feel about the Xbox One and where Microsoft is at with the system?
Is it okay if I call it Xbone on the air?
Yes, you can
okay.
Xbone. The internet will love you for that.
It was a weird thing for me to watch them do that initial press, because I had, when the heat was on me to stand up in front and represent the thing, I had a PowerPoint of things you couldn't say.
Right.
And Don Matrick essentially took that PowerPoint and just read it as their presentation, like everything that it was totally illegal to say.
What were some of those things you weren't supposed to say?
Well, listen, I think that there's a lot of merit to the platform message that he had and the integration of content and all that stuff. We've seen it work really well with Netflix and other streaming video services and content services on consoles. It's been awesome. It's a good business, okay? But fundamentally, the reason people buy consoles is because they're gamers and they want to play awesome games and they want to feel really good about it and they want to feel like you give a shit about them. Yep. They want to feel like you give a shit about giving them good games, okay? And so if you're running the platform, you have to look at them and say, I am going to make awesome games for you. You are the most important thing in the world to me. And instead what Microsoft said was, thanks guys for getting this brand where it is. Now we're taking over and it's going to be about streaming football. Right. And people were like, it felt bad. I'm not the most important thing anymore, because they are the most important.
So what is your you don't talk about other things? What was the PowerPoint saying? Don't talk about other things but games?
The PowerPoint said, talk about the fact that this entire business exists to make awesome games, which it did. And anytime we saw internally it not being about that, somebody, most often Uncle Seamus, threw a fit.
Right.
And it produced a culture, which produced a platform that was all about the games. And we had a steep gradient to climb. In 2001 or 2000 or 1999, we would go around and say Microsoft is going to make a console, and then after 10 minutes when the laughing died down, and when the jokes about blue screen of death died down, and when the jokes about running Excel spreadsheets on your console died down, we would talk about the plan, and the plan worked, right? But there was a really adverse gradient that we had to climb up to convince people that we were going to make a credible game console. Now, in retrospect, it seems obvious, but it wasn't so obvious then. And in many ways, with that presentation, Microsoft put themselves in that same hole again. And it was just extremely bizarre personally for me to watch. I was reaching out of the TV no, don't say that.
Stop.
Yeah, but then, as Jason predicted, they turned it around. They changed the messaging, they changed the policies, and they got a lot of that back. They remembered that the most important people in the world were gamers, and they talked to those people.
And they've still, since E3 sort of been trying to climb out of that hole. I saw even today, the day we're taping it, they're giving away free Xbox Ones to some of their fans on the internet. And stuff
I don't think
you mean Xbox?
Having dealt with Microsoft,
yes,
behind the scenes, they were absolutely clear at all times that it was about the gamer.
Right.
They had spent so much time and so much energy walking down the road of what was coming next, and had gotten themselves so excited about what was coming next, that they forgot to then remind the world, who hadn't been part of all their meetings, that indeed it was the gamer that made sense. So I always understood the message they were trying to make.
Right.
They utterly flubbed that message. And as a result, they had to step back, right? They had to step off that message.
Because there is, a lot of innovative
There's
thinking.
an interesting thing, actually, that a friend of mine said. He said, yeah, Microsoft spent all those billions of dollars to make the new console, for it not to play games. Duh, what are people thinking? But as Jason says, you have to tell people that. You have to say, this is what we're doing.
Well, and there's a lot of innovative thinking, I think, in that system. When you look, compared to PlayStation 4, which is a great game system. A lot of the stuff, and I've played it with, the switching between TV and games. that works, and it's interesting, and there's a lot of, deep thinking about sort of that platform, right? The software and services. But does that matter to gamers, Michael?
Microsoft made a mistake in determining how we were going to access those non-game services.
Right.
I don't think anybody is against getting more. So even if you buy the console to play games, it's not going to upset you that you can also watch Netflix. Right? No,
I don't want this.
Well, the features, if it's complicated, it might bother you. But if you have access to football, no one's going to say, oh, it gets football? Fuck that, I'm not going to buy an Xbox. They'll say, oh, okay, somebody in my family might watch it. So I get the concept. What Microsoft made a mistake doing was saying, the way you're going to access this is with Kinect.
Right.
Rather than with your touchscreen device, which I think Microsoft, when they launched Kinect, it never occurred to them every household that buys an Xbox or a console is going to have a touchscreen device that's connected to the internet.
Right. So
they said, we're going to dictate to you that you're going to use Kinect, and we're going to let you pay for it. You're going to pay $100 more. And when I talked to them post E3, I mean, I literally had lunch with them, you did too, that same day, a couple months ago. I said to them, you really have to convince people it's worth $100 for Kinect. And the three-headed monster that runs Microsoft now, they're like, no, that's not what you're paying for. You're paying for the features and functionality. And I said, look, guys, I know that's the company message. Yeah. The gamer goes, I'm getting this stuff in the box that I don't think I need or want, and you're asking me to pay $100 for it.
Yeah, I think
and so
is the mistake.
So I think it's Kinect their Blu-ray.
It's the mistake they can't walk off of.
Right, it is. It's their Blu-ray. So I think the solution to the problem is jettison Kinect, because the box totally works with smart glass, every smart glass. Right. So jettison Kinect, get it the fuck out of the box, and lower the price by $100. And then we're having a completely different conversation about how, wow, they're both $400. What a great deal. They both do a whole lot of cool stuff. They both have great games. But instead, the rest of the next 30 minutes of this bonus round are going to be dedicated to why Microsoft screwed up by packing Kinect in the box. So the answer to your question is, I think gamers would embrace all the other features and functionality if they didn't have to pay more for it. Well, but they say $100 for football. I don't want football.
You got to remember, though. I mean, I think that the subtext here that we got to point out, because we live in this all day long, we have lived in it all day long, is that it's not so simple to run one of these divisions of a company, to run the PlayStation division, run Xbox division, and you can't have the simple marketing message that you want. You have to address your investors. You have to address the internal politics, and it is complicated. Why is the Kinect in there? There's a lot of internal pressure to keep the Kinect in there because there is a huge investment in the Kinect, and maybe those guys aren't around anymore, but the legacy of that debt, politically, economically, is still around, and it takes an incredibly deft manager.
Drag the company
down,
and
to
Microsoft
get around
now
that.
Has a chance to just jettison all of that because they are rejiggering
I think
everybody.
Come March, April, if Sony's way ahead, if Sony sold through 6 million and Microsoft sold through 3 million, they're going to reconsider Kinect.
I'd be interested
if they're neck and neck, then it might go to next Christmas.
Right after the announcement, there were all the problems they had, right? They were not going to allow used games in a certain fashion. They were not going to allow indie games in the same way Sony was. All of those things were easy changes. So within 48 hours, they had changed half of them, and within a couple of weeks, they had changed the rest. Kinect's not as easy.
Right.
Because everything they had done up until that point planned on Kinect being in the box. It's the hardest one for them to say, mea culpa, we're going to take it out of the box.
Well,
it's really, really hard.
Yet there's nothing that
probably
really uses it.
There was a technique that we exactly used to get Xbox off the ground, and that technique was intentionally telling the public about stuff and getting a huge reaction, and then there is no argument internally, right? And so in the case of their announcement, it was easy. I'm sure there was a lot of dissension within Microsoft about those policies, right? And I'm sure that there was some sort of fiat that was thrown down about how those are going to be the policies because we have to protect our business and right? And people who know gamers are like, oh my God, you're going to explode a hand grenade in your hand if you say that. And they did. And all that feedback came, and then suddenly the argument internally is easily, right? The Kinect, it's a little bit of a different thing. Unless there's a huge outrage about the Kinect, then it's a subtle thing.
So the solution is cut the price $100 and eat the cost of Kinect and still pack it in the box.
And Microsoft
can do that.
No,
and so I
they
talked
can
to
do it, and also the financial pain might cause.
So I talked to the three-headed monster. I talked to the three-head guys about an alternative to that because I said you got to give the consumer $100 of value, and they said, so what would you suggest? And I go, well, throwing a game is easy, but I said give them a year of Xbox Live Gold, and you should have seen their faces like, why would we do that? They'll pay us. And I go, what percentage of Xbox 360 owners are paying members Xbox Live Gold?
Oh, but
1 out of 3.
This is an interesting moment because, certainly you, and increasingly me, because I have a mobile games company now, we think about installed copies of whatever it is versus how much money you're going to get paid by the audience, and you make that balance, right? This is a new way of thinking to a lot of guys who are from the console business, and frankly, Microsoft and Sony are both in a lot of trouble because it's a new way of thinking from them from a corporate standpoint. So that trade-off, which to the CEO of Supercell would seem like a no-brainer.
Right.
Get it out there. Yeah, because you know what? We're going to give them more services and more games and a bigger install base.
And you'll get 100% conversion
Nobody
rate.
would ever push back against that. So I guess in the year 2013, to have somebody say, why would we give it away just in order to increase the installed base? Seems a little bit arcane, but again, you have to remember that this is a radically new way of thinking. We think about it all day long, but it's really only a couple of years that it's been viable.
All right, guys, hold that thought. We're going to be right back here on the bonus round.
So you heard it here first. A free year of Xbox Live Gold with every Xbox
Or something comparable, something to justify that extra $100. Although I have to say, shelling out $100 extra bucks, even if you're getting something of $100 value that you would pay over time, for a lot of people it's difficult. It's a lot of money. And what both Microsoft and Sony do realize is they only get one chance every generation to get people to switch their allegiance. I am not a Sony fanboy, I'm not a Microsoft fan. I have both. I'm lucky because I can afford both. Most people get one or the other, and they want to buy the one they already have.
One in every room of your house, just like your HDTVs.
So you get a chance to switch people very infrequently, and if Microsoft drops that ball, it's going to be hard to pick it up.
Well, and that's the thing that I think has been fascinating about this year, because you said a few years ago.
Well, Jason has the PlayStation and the TV over the bathtub, but he actually has the Xbox in the room with the toilet.
No, it's not TV by the pool.
So we forget, and I think Jason continuously brings us back here. And you gotta, it's gotta always be in your mind that, $100 is a big deal. And if it's $100 less to buy the thing, okay, and then but you have it, and then you have that customer for years, and if you treat that customer well, they will have the money and they will feel good about spending the money on other content. And that other content is going to make you a lot more margin in your business than the $100 that you eat on the hardware is ever going to take away from you. That's really important to understand. But again, this is a really new way of thinking for a lot of businesses, not just Microsoft and Sony. I mean, all sorts of old school businesses are getting creamed by this right now.
Well, the one thing that I think is fascinating this year is when I talked to Sony earlier in the year about PlayStation 4, the one thing they couldn't figure out how to unlock was, all these Xbox Live gamers love their achievements, love their gamer scores, all that. And now, after all the announcements, I think so many people were just willing to kind of flee away from Xbox and say, hey, I'll go to PlayStation. It's like, I want to move to this other platform that seems to be more for me. So how much damage do you think has Microsoft done long term? They've tried to recover, but I mean, how tough is it going to be for them over the next year here to win back these games?
I think short term, they've done a lot of damage to themselves. And this year is a very important year because, as we keep saying, in a few years, who knows where the industry will be. But I also, one of the things, since the last time we were on this show, I was watching the show this morning, so I watched everything we said. I believed back then, and I believe even more now, most of these things are not catastrophic and momentary. Things take time and things change over time. So again, at E3, it was easy to say it's absolutely over for Microsoft. And then 48 hours later, it had changed. Maybe not, they hadn't recovered 100%, but they had gotten up off their stumble and they were walking. So it's anytime you sit there and say it's over for Microsoft, which is easy to say now, you're generally jumping ahead of yourself. And I think there's a lot of things that can happen over the next few years that will make a difference. There's a lot of subtle things going on. Why does this game play 1080 on this and up-res to 1080 on that? I think in 6 months that'll be behind us. I think that's a very minor instance, but it matters. It matters. It's part
people
of
love to debate that, 720 versus 1080, and
absolutely. But long term, we're not going to be looking back on that. How many people remember in 2006 who are sitting in front of their PlayStations right now that it was a $600 launch that we just said, and all the other things we're saying about it? They don't remember any of that. That's so far behind us now, and it will. This stuff will be behind us.
If you're Microsoft, what do they have to do to win this generation, to climb above Sony? What steps should they be taking?
They have to be price competitive. I mean, I think there's not a chance that they sell more consoles if they remain $100 more expensive. It's just not possible. The boxes are too similar, and consumers don't perceive $100 of value from Kinect.
But what if...
To put it in perspective, you follow companies. Let's say that they have to give away 8 million, a first year of sales would be 8 million units. Let's say I have to give away $100. It's not 100 to them because there's markup on it and everything else, but you're talking $800 million worth of eating, right? They can eat 800 million without thinking about it. They have $60+ billion in the bank. So if it's important to them, absolutely.
And that's
but
a hard
they
decision.
can do it. It's absolutely. Nobody says let's just eat it $800 million, but it's on the table and they can do it. and it's not going to radically change Microsoft's future from a cash flow standpoint.
And
so the
by
question
way-
is
by
it
the
a
way,
good thing for them to do?
It's 7 million consoles if you charge $500.
Exactly,
And
so
it's
you're
9
losing-
million consoles if you charge $400. So they actually won't eat $800 million.
Of course.
It's probably like 300 million.
So as the analyst, I
and
want-
then the lifetime value of that extra couple of million consumers is at least $1,000 a piece.
Exactly.
I
So
think
So
it's
it's
important
$2
to
billion that you make to give up this 800
So
so
million.
you
the other
walk
thing
down
to
the
note
road and you
here-
say they could just eat it.
They should eat
They could
it.
just eat
They
it.
should eat
you
it.
have another really important thing to note here, which is that let's say it seems like you're eating more money if you go to 900 million. But in point of fact, the Xbox customer is much more likely than a Sony customer to spend money online.
Right.
So that increased sales is going to net you a lot more revenue.
Right.
No, of
And
course.
you have to, model that stuff in a very sophisticated way, and then go to, whoever the powers that be are above the three-headed monster, and make your case to that person who may be totally tone deaf to games, maybe totally tone deaf still to the way that the free-to-play model works, the way that free software has gone, the way that the way that the new economy of software as a service is working.
It's
and
only
make
two
that
people.
case. Very
it's
hard
only
to do.
two people. It's Julie Larson Green and Steve Ballmer and/or his successor. That's it. There's one person above the three guys that run the division, and then there's
it's
the
Joachim
CEO.
Kempen put out a great book. I don't know if you saw that or not. He was the sort of like, I don't know what his actual title was, I think it varied, but he was sort of the grumpy old guy you had to go to get cash at Microsoft for a long time. And he spent a lot of time talking about how all of Microsoft's new products are essentially rubbish. It's hilarious to read this book. And one of them is Xbox. It's just total rubbish, right? They never should have done it. It should be spun off as its own division and all this other stuff, right? And it's indicative of, if you read it, the kind of thinking that you have to go up against to make what we think are these like seemingly trivial decisions. And it's it's like having Kutaragi out and not having somebody who is constantly telling you how it has to be done. Who's thinking about the world like it's
I think
1992.
Xbox and Xbox Live are integral to Microsoft's future.
Yeah.
And how much did they eat on Surface this year? How much
Yeah.
did they take a
Right.
negative write-down? 800
million.
million.
There you go.
Just about the same. And is anybody thinking that Microsoft is weakened because of it? It's
Stock's
not
at
good.
a 5-year high right
Stock's
now.
at a 5-year high, right? So a major thing for everybody who's watching to understand is there's a big difference between Microsoft and Sony in terms of size, cash position. Writing down 800 million for Sony right now would be a big deal.
Right.
Writing down 800 million for Microsoft is doable.
Writing 800 down for Sony right now would involve the CEO apologizing to the shareholders.
I have
and
to tell you
bowing.
the truth, though. I think the $400 PS4 was an $800 million write-down for Sony because I think they were thinking 500, and they realized they had an opportunity when Microsoft said 500 to price below them, and they
They're
did.
aggressive.
Yeah, I think that, and in fact, I think they were ready to go lower, and so they went back to Tokyo saying we saved money.
Yeah, I think that's
Well,
But-
that's one thing we haven't talked about is, there's a lot of talk about Microsoft this year about would they do a subsidy on the box or would it become your cable box? And, as we look over the next few years, how do you guys feel the sort of entertainment play for Microsoft is going to run its course? Because, we know what PlayStation 4 is, but is there a scenario next year where all of a sudden Comcast is saying, hey, you're getting an Xbox One as your cable box,
it's
you're going to get it for
gonna happen.
$99, and then they're going to all of a sudden have a massive install base that could potentially pull ahead of Sony and
absolutely
change
going
the
to
story.
happen, and I think they always plan for that to happen at launch, and I just don't think they got their act together
Right.
to get distribution through cable companies.
So that would be a big game changer,
because they
right?
need GameStop and Best Buy to sell you the box,
Right.
and Walmart, and those guys don't sell cable subscriptions.
Uh-huh.
So they've got to work that through. That's a next year. That's a Christmas
Yeah, it's
2014.
an awkward moment right now when
Right.
all that stuff is
It's gonna happen.
is disconnected.
And how is that
And
going
it's
to,
a huge advantage. If the cable goes into the Xbox, you're much more likely to be using the Xbox more often, which gives you opportunities to buy more online games. It's massive for them. They were so far down that road. They were so far ahead of Sony in their minds
Right.
in doing that they forgot to sell the game or the console.
That's exactly
what
right.
happened to them.
And that took so much effort that's where their focus went. It's an interesting thing though. You bring up Surface again and again. What's the difference between Xbox and Surface at a business from a business level standpoint? It's that there's no equivalent for Xbox Live on Surface. Aside from the sales of the thing and its operating system, there's
Right.
no economy that's built around
Right.
that. This is the huge advantage that Xbox has as a business, politically inside of Microsoft, and also just as a piece to move around on the battlefield. And something Sony doesn't have an answer to really. Very interesting.
So but if they do the cable thing, does that then change the conversation about, are they going to pull ahead of Sony? How do they win this generation? If all of a sudden
they
there's
have to get the console into people's hands, and I think
But they could through a cable
Everybody watching, whether they have a Microsoft console or a Sony console, would agree $100 makes a difference.
right.
Right?
And this
Especially
year,
if you have an Xbox and you've jumped ship mentally to PlayStation, and now all of a sudden they're the same price, you might reconsider. That's the audience that we're talking about when we're talking about taking this
We
step.
can be all high and mighty and discuss business models. Nobody walks into the Best Buy and asks the salesperson, "I would like the most efficient home console for my entertainment consumption." Right? No, it's how much does it cost and how stoked am I about what it can do. And both of these guys have to do a much better job exciting consumers about why they have to have this thing in their house. It's a passion product.
Yep.
It's an entertainment product,
Agreed.
right? All of this crap that we're talking about is very abstract. Maybe we even seem smart about it occasionally, but it doesn't matter one bit if people don't walk into the store and have to have that PlayStation 4.
Right.
And coincidentally, they can afford it. Right? Those are the only two things that really matter, and that's what drives the entire thing. All this other junk that we're talking about is really just contributing to that pinnacle moment. If that pinnacle moment doesn't connect, you're not going to have 50 million consoles out there.
Or 250 million.
And you have to be, I think, at the end of the day, even more focused now because you have competition from tablets and all these other people who are coming around.
All right, when we come back, we're going to talk more about what this all means for the game developer and the creator right here in the bonus round.